Hey guys, tonight we're drifting back to a time when clothing wasn't just clothing. It was power, prayer, and politics, all stitched into one. You're stepping onto the sun-drenched shores of ancient Hawaii, your bare feet sinking into the black volcanic sand, still warm from the morning sun. Coconut palms sway like metronomes in the distance. And out beyond the cliffs, the ocean keeps humming its deep lullaby. But what catches your eye isn't the view. It's the man walking toward you. He's tall, poised, and draped in what looks like sunlight itself. A feathered cloak. No, a second skin made of shimmering gold and red catches the light in 1,000 directions. It fans behind him with every movement, as if the wind knows better than to ignore a chief of this caliber. His head is crowned with a mahiole, a helmet woven from plant fibers, and crowned with feathers that match his cloak. This isn't just fashion, this is war paint for the soul. And you, time traveler, better not stare too long. In ancient Hawaii, the wrong look at the wrong moment might get you flattened like taro under a stone pestle. Royalty doesn't just rule here, they radiate divine mana. And you probably won't survive this if you forget that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far and wide this little history journey travels. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow him now, trailing just far enough behind to avoid insult, but close enough to see the tremble in the air around his shoulders. Those feathers, they're alive somehow. No, not alive in the literal sense, but in the way fire dances or thunder rumbles just before it splits the sky. The cloak he wears is called an ahu'ula, a feather cloak reserved for ali'i, or high-ranking chiefs. Red feathered garment, if you want to translate it, but that's like calling the Mona Lisa a painting of a lady. The reality is heavier, more sacred. The ahu'ula is a symbol, a spell, and a shield, worn in battle and at ceremony. It doesn't just protect the body, it announces the soul's pedigree. Every individual feather was collected, sorted, and arranged by hand. No shortcuts, no sewing machines, no bird farms. You'd be forgiven for assuming this was the work of hundreds. But really, a handful of kahili artisans and feather hunters, experts in silence, patience, and devotion, collected these with a care that borders on obsession. Red feathers, like the ones glowing across the chief's back, came from the ikiwi, a honey creeper with a curved beak and fiery plumage. Yellow ones, rarer still, came from the now endangered owo and mamo birds. One yellow bird might yield just a few usable feathers. The scale of effort required is staggering. And remember, these weren't just hunting trips. These were spiritual missions. Every bird caught was released, unless it had passed naturally or was chosen for a deeper offering, because each feather, no matter how tiny, carried mana, the life force. Snipping it from a living creature was like borrowing stardust from the gods. That's not a metaphor. That's the belief. Now, let's step closer to this chief. You see the people parting before him like water before a canoe. No one speaks. No one touches the garment. In fact, no one touches him. His status makes him kapu, sacred and untouchable. Even his shadow is holy. A lesser man who accidentally steps in it might be executed on the spot. Historians still argue whether the harshness of these laws reflected religious devotion or social control. But either way, they made one thing clear. The chief's cloak was more than decorative. It was divine. The most famous ahu'ula you might hear about today belonged to King Kamehameha I, the chief who united the Hawaiian Islands into a single kingdom in the late 18th century. His cloak, still displayed today in museums, contains hundreds of thousands of feathers and is believed to have taken generations to complete. Just imagine the hands, so many hands, passing feathers, chanting, weaving, binding. That cloak wasn't made in a month or a year. It was born over lifetimes. But tonight, the chief before you isn't Kamehameha. He's older, maybe more weathered. His eyes speak of storms endured. His cloak is smaller, but no less radiant, lined with a red so deep it almost hums in the dark. As he passes, a child tugs at your hand, perhaps your own in this dream, and whispers, "That cloak belonged to his grandfather, woven with feathers from the rebellion." You nod solemnly, not knowing exactly what that means, but feeling the weight of it all the same. These cloaks aren't just inherited, they are lived in. They carry not just memory, but intention. And here's a strange thing. Each cloak is utterly unique, not just in color or size, but in spirit. Some shimmer like fire, others throb like blood. Some are triangular, others more rounded. Some trail behind like royal trains, others wrap snug like armor. They're tailored to the mana of the wearer. But just as important as the cloak is how it's worn. The drape over the shoulder, the angle of the collar, the movement of the hands, all of it speaks. Watching a chief approach in full feathered regalia is like reading a poem you don't need words for. You understand it in your skin. There's an old chant, still murmured in hushed gatherings, that says, "O bird of flame, lend me your cloak. Let me walk like thunder across their silence. Let my feathers stir fear in those who forget my name." Tonight, you feel the truth of those words. The cloak isn't just a status symbol. It's a weapon, a whisper of legacy, a feathered storm that reminds everyone this land has rulers chosen not just by birth, but by the birds who gave their plumes and the gods who watched them fall. And as twilight thickens, that cloak seems to glow even brighter, like it's storing the last of the sun just for him. You lie back now on a patch of grass, lulled by the sound of distant drums and the flicker of torches bouncing against feathers, and you wonder if you could wear such a cloak just once. Would you feel the same mana moving through your bones? Or would it be too much? Better not try. These cloaks were never meant for dreamers. You wake, if you ever truly slept, to the sound of soft rustling, not the wind in the trees, not grass brushing against your legs, but something sharper, drier, rhythmic. It takes a moment to place it. Then you see the figure in the distance, standing perfectly still beneath the canopy. his body camouflaged in brown kapa cloth. He's watching a bird, not just any bird. The tiny flash of crimson in the morning light gives it away. An iiwi with its curved beak and neon plumage that looks like someone dipped it in molten sunset. The bird flits from branch to branch, and the man doesn't move a muscle. He's been here, you realize, for hours. This is a feather hunter, not a soldier, not a priest, but every bit as vital to the chief's image as a sword or a sermon. The process of collecting feathers, especially red ones, is sacred work. These men aren't out to kill. They're here to gather. And they're patient in a way modern life no longer permits. Some would camp in the uplands for weeks, building simple shelters of ferns and leaves. They placed traps baited with blossoms, waited, and when the birds came, they plucked just a few feathers, always careful not to injure the bird, and then let it go. You want to ask why they didn't just kill the bird outright and gather more feathers in one go. But you remember, mana, taking too much, whether of a bird, a tree, or a wave, brings imbalance. To pluck a few feathers and release the bird was to honor the spirit of the creature, to thank it, and to ensure the land stayed fertile. It's a gentle violence, if such a thing exists. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread across all regions or limited to the domains of particular alii. But one thing remains agreed. The relationship between birds and people was both utilitarian and deeply spiritual. You move closer, trying not to break the moment. The hunter doesn't acknowledge you. His eyes are locked on the bird, his hands still. But something tells you he knows you're there, and he's letting you stay. Now look at his tools. No rifles, no nets, just snare sticks made from local woods, sometimes coated with sticky sap or scented with floral nectar. A carved gourd for carrying feathers, and slung across his shoulder, a small bundle of already gathered treasure, protected by kapa wrap and his own careful breath. This single hunter might collect feathers for months to contribute to a garment that won't be completed in his lifetime. That's the scale we're talking about. Some cloaks took generations. They weren't projects, they were family inheritances, spiritual trusts, passed from craftsman to craftsman like a living promise. Nearby, another man approaches, not a hunter this time, but a chanter, perhaps a kahuna, murmuring lines under his breath in time with his steps. You can't make out the words, but they sound old, ancient, even by Hawaiian standards. He's blessing the area, sanctifying the work, asking the forest for permission. Because here, in this world of feathers and mana, everything has a voice, even silence. There's a story, half whispered, half chanted, about a hunter who ignored the protocols. Greedy for yellow feathers, he captured dozens of old birds, plucked them bald, and discarded them like broken leaves. Within days, a storm rose over the mountain pass. His camp was swept away, his name forgotten. The birds, it said, still call out a warning in the wind. A soft ooh, ooh, that means remember. You shiver, just a little. Then a different noise distracts you. A faint clinking, a kind of dull percussion. You follow it down a narrow trail, where a small group of men and women sit beneath a lean-to, arranging feathers by color and texture. The sorting process is meticulous. Feathers are divided not only by hue, yellow, red, black, but also by length, curve, and softness. Each feather is cleaned, smoothed, and carefully flattened. One woman holds up a single red plume, squints at it, and sets it aside. Not good enough. She hums as she works, a melody that reminds you of wind across a canyon. Another man dips a needle of bone into thread made from olona bark fiber, tying the base of a feather into a netted backing. This will eventually be part of a collar, or maybe the shoulder of a cape. It's like watching embroidery at the scale of empires. Did you know it wasn't just cloaks they made? There were mahaiole, those feathered helmets that turned noble heads into avatars of gods. There were kahili, feathered staffs carried beside royalty like walking auras. Even ceremonial images of gods, the akua, were dressed in feathers to reflect their divine status. And yet somehow, the cloak remains the most intimate form. It wraps the wearer. It touches the skin. One artisan laughs, softly, holding up a yellow and black feather, side by side. Like sun and shadow, he says. Though whether he's talking to you or to the spirit of the bird, you're not sure. There's a quiet pride in this work. No one rushes. No one cuts corners. You get the sense that to sew a single line incorrectly could unravel more than just a cloak. It could offend ancestors, shake family lines, or curse a chief. So much depends on these tiny feathers. Each one is a brushstroke in a portrait of power. And here's something delightful and unexpected. Certain feathers were believed to sing. Not literally, of course, but the way they caught the wind, the rustle they made when the chief walked. It created a sound like murmured applause. A cloak wasn't just seen, it was heard. That's right. In a world before microphones, capes were performance art. You didn't just enter a space, you arrived, with every step exhaling power. You settled down beside the feather workers, lulled by their movements. The way their fingers move seems more like prayer than craft. One woman notices your interest and pats the mat beside her. She hands you a small, discarded feather, bent, a little faded. Not for a chief, she says with a smile. But for you? Maybe. You hold it, suddenly aware of its weightlessness, and yet how it carries generations of meaning. You think of the birds, the forests, the prayers, the hands. This single feather, unworthy for a cloak, still feels like a secret. And as the sun begins its descent, and the light takes on that soft amber hue, you lie back once again, cradled in birdsong and stories, wondering just how long these craftspeople have been here, stitching dreams into fabric. 500 years. 1,000? Historians still debate exactly when feather cloaks first appeared in Hawaiian culture. Some believe they evolved alongside chiefly hierarchies. Others argue they were inspired by earlier Polynesian practices and refined uniquely in the Hawaiian archipelago. But one thing's for sure. Once they appeared, they never lost their grip on the imagination. Not even now. Not even tonight. He drums begin. just before dusk, low and rolling, like thunder waiting for a permission. You're led toward a clearing. No, not just a clearing, a ceremonial site, a sacred one. You see tall wooden posts carved with curling glyphs, and a raised platform woven from mats and thick logs, still damp from earlier rains. Torches line the perimeter. Their flicker hits the underbellies of swaying leaves, casting dancing shadows like a flock of birds overhead. You're about to witness an aha ula, a ceremonial presentation of a new feather cloak. It's not every day such a garment is unveiled. And it's not a fashion show. This is a ritual, a performance of power, identity, and lineage. The kind of moment that's usually remembered in chants, not journal entries. You take your place among a quiet gathering of villagers, advisors, and lesser chiefs. Everyone waits. The cloak itself is still hidden, covered by bark cloth and guarded on all sides. Even the torches seem to lean in. Then the chanting begins. It starts soft and low. The voices of kahu, priests or guardians, rising like mist. They chant the genealogy of the wearer, invoking names that stretch centuries deep. Names that were spoken before these islands had kings or palaces. The words flow like lava, slow, glowing, inevitable. They tell of ancestors who tamed wild rivers, who rode sharks into battle, who were born from stars. You don't know all the words, but you feel the weight of them. Every syllable is a drumbeat in the blood. Finally, the bark cloth is lifted. The first glimpse of the cloak silences even the children. The feathers, hundreds of thousands of them, gleam like liquid fire. Reds deeper than coals, yellows so vivid they might blind the sun, black accents that shimmer in indigo beneath torchlight. It is not just beautiful, it's unnatural, like it was woven from the dreams of birds. The cloak is lifted by 4 attendants, each one holding a corner, like they're cradling an infant god. Slowly, with ceremony and reverence, they carry it to the alii, who will wear it. He stands tall, bare-chested, expression unreadable. His skin is marked with tattoos that trace his victories. His left shoulder tells the story of the famine he ended, while his right bears symbols of the sea battle he won at age 17. But even these disappear under the cloak as it is placed on his shoulders. And just like that, he is transformed. He was already a chief, but now, he becomes a symbol. You watch the way the crowd changes. They were kneeling before, but now they bow lower, some even pressing foreheads to earth. The cloak has shifted the air, like the arrival of a storm or an eclipse. Even the torch flames seem to hesitate. There's something eerie about how quiet it gets. Just for a moment, and then, you swear you hear it, a sound like wings. Not actual wings, no flapping, more like the memory of wings. The whisper of air, disturbed by divine motion. That's what a good cloak does. It doesn't just decorate, it speaks. It announces presence. One man beside you whispers. When he wears that, even the volcano listens. Now the procession begins. The newly cloaked chief walks among the people, each step a declaration. The cape doesn't drag, it floats. Every movement causes a shimmer, like sunlight on fish scales. Here's a curious thing. Most Hawaiian cloaks are short in the front and taper to dramatic points in the back. It creates the effect of a radiant triangle or a flame flickering toward heaven. Some were designed for battle, compact, easy to move in. Others, like the one you see now, were meant for ceremony, trailing down almost to the ankles. A quick historical aside while the chief strides past. Historians have long debated whether the triangular shape of many cloaks was inspired by the form of birds in flight, or possibly by the shape of shark fins, another symbol of power. What's fascinating is that we don't know for sure. No written records from the time explain it directly. The symbols speak, but they do not clarify. Anyway, back to the moment. The chief now stands before the sacred platform. Another chant rises, this one faster, more rhythmic, more dangerous. You realize it's not just a celebration, it's also a reminder. The cloak doesn't just say, "I am your leader." It also says, "Challenge me and perish." There's a phrase in Hawaiian, "Hi aliika aina, he kaua ke kanaka." The land is chief, and people are its servants. But tonight, the cloak seems to bend that rule. Tonight, the chief becomes more than a man. He becomes the land. He becomes history, made flesh. Suddenly, there's movement at the edges of the crowd. A young warrior steps forward. A test? A challenge? No, a dance. He begins to move in a warrior's hula, a dance of offering and aggression. His movements are sharp, controlled, like a blade held at the throat of silence. As he dances, he does not face the chief. He faces away, a sign of respect, yes, but also humility. You never turn your back on a chief unless commanded to. More dancers join. Drums rise. The air is thick now with sweat, firelight, and feathers shifting ever so slightly in the wind. And in this moment, you understand. The cloak isn't an accessory. It's a declaration, a sacred technology. It doesn't just say who the chief is, it makes him who he is. Without it, he's a powerful man. With it, he's myth. A whisper reaches your ear, someone recalling an older story. One chief, wearing a freshly blessed cloak, stepped between warring villages and was said to glow so brightly that both sides dropped their weapons. No battle, just awe. Whether it's true or not, doesn't matter. The story's been told enough to live. A baby cries in the distance, and even that sound seems hushed by the majesty of what's happening. Eventually, the ceremony winds down. The cloaked chief returns to the platform. The chant changes again, this time into a prayer of safekeeping, a request to the gods to shield the feathers, the cloak, and the mana it holds. And as the torch flames die out one by one, the night air grows cooler, softer, still thick with incense, but now tinged with rain that hasn't fallen yet. You lie back on the grass, once again, your heart still beating in rhythm with the drums. And as your eyes drift shut, you see the silhouette of that cloak, gold and crimson, burned onto your eyelids. You wonder if the chief feels the same weight you do. Not the cloak's fabric weight, but the weight of history, of being wrapped in the prayers of 1,000 generations, of being held up night after night by birds who never asked to be remembered, but now always will be. You wake to the soft slap of feet on damp stone. It's early, just past dawn, and the dew is still clinging to the leaves, like whispers that haven't found words yet. The village is quiet, except for the quiet hiss of a cooking fire and the rhythmic splash of a paddle out in the distance. But then you hear it. Not a chant, not a bird call, just silence, clearing space for someone important. You turn. He's there again. The same chief you saw cloaked in ceremony the night before. But this morning, everything is different. He walks alone now. No procession, no torches. The cloak still hangs from his shoulders, but it's wrapped tighter around him, more functional than radiant. Yet somehow, that makes it even more striking. The early sun catches the red feathers, turning them rust-colored in the soft light. The yellow glints like trapped morning. You follow him, not too close. He doesn't glance back, but somehow, you know you're allowed. Maybe he knows you're not from this time. Maybe that's why he lets you see what others never could. He climbs a narrow path, one that winds between black lava rock and steep terraces of taro. When he finally stops, it's at a flat overlook above the valley. From here, you can see it all. Forest, sea, village, clouds slowly pulling apart, like torn tapa cloth. And it hits you. He is the cloak. That's not metaphor. That's the truth of it. He wears it, yes. But more than that, it wears him. The garment isn't just sewn with feathers. It's stitched with identity, lineage, mana. This man, this Ali'i, is only a chief because people believe the cloak says so. And they believe the cloak because of the birds, the ancestors, the chants. It's a triangle of trust. The people, the cloak, the wearer. Historians still argue whether Ali'i became sacred through deeds or through symbols like the feather cloak. But the answer might be both. Perhaps the cloak didn't grant power. It confirmed it. You watch him stand there, not posing, not performing, just being. He reaches behind and gently adjusts the collar. You see the muscles in his back shift beneath the weight. Yes, it's heavy. Even feathers, sewn so tightly, add up. Some cloaks weighed several pounds. And that's just the physical burden. Now think about the emotional one. Every feather might represent a story. A bird caught on a foggy morning. A prayer whispered in the dark. A promise made by someone long dead. Every feather has been touched by hands, now buried. Every one of them is a receipt from history. You imagine a child, generations from now, being told, your great-grandfather's feather is somewhere in this cloak. And the child, nodding solemnly, not knowing which feather, but knowing it matters. And then, here comes a detail you might have missed. The kahili bearer. He arrives with no sound, holding the tall feathered staff, vertically like a banner of rainbows. The kahili is just as powerful a symbol as the cloak itself, made of long feathers, often from rare birds, bound to a wooden shaft. It was the ultimate sign of chiefly presence. It didn't serve a practical purpose, not a walking stick, not a weapon. But when it moved, it told the world who stood beneath it. This one is taller than the chief himself. The feathers at its top sway gently in the breeze, like flames that refuse to go out. There's a moment where the chief stands still, the cloak wrapped around him, the kahili behind him, and you swear he's more sculpture than man. The kind of image you'd find etched on temple walls if Hawaii had carved in stone. And yet, even in all this stillness, you notice his feet. They're bare, dusty, calloused from walking, human. You feel the contradiction tightening around your chest. This person is a man, but he's not just a man. He's wrapped in symbols, trailed by ghosts, held upright by myths. It's not performance. It's a role, one he didn't choose, but was born into. Would you want that? To live a life where every step is watched, where you can't remove your cloak without removing your identity, where silence and solitude are luxuries you're not permitted to have. There's a reason many chiefs aged early. Power is a heavy garment. Back down in the village, people begin to stir. You see smoke curling from cooking pits, hear laughter from children playing with coconut husks. The day is beginning, and slowly the chief turns. He looks right at you. You freeze. He nods. Not a grand gesture, just a small tilt of the chin. Then he walks past, the cloak rustling like dry grass, and the kahili bearer follows. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. Down the path, he'll return to the people. He'll speak in council, arbitrate disputes, receive offerings. He'll give orders, approve marriages, bless canoes. And all the while, the cloak will be with him. Not always worn, perhaps, but always nearby, stored in a sacred container, guarded, cared for. Because if the cloak is lost, the mana it holds might scatter. And a chief without mana, that's just a man in a fancy outfit. You wander through the village now, eyes open to details you missed before. Children practicing chants, elders weaving kapa, a young woman braiding flowers into a lei, perhaps for the cloak's next ceremony. There's a hum here, a rhythm. Everyone has a role. Feather hunters, artisans, priests, dancers, chiefs. And they all orbit around these living symbols. The cloaks, the kohili, the rituals that bind them. It's tempting to think of the feather cloak as a relic, but it isn't. It's alive. It breathes. It listens. And in quiet moments, like this one, you almost feel it brushing past you, asking not to be forgotten. So, you promise, if only in your heart, that you'll remember, even if you never wear such a cloak yourself. You'll carry the weight of its meaning. A feather, after all, is light, but meaning is what makes it soar. By midday, the air turns thick and syrupy, humming with the sounds of insects and waves rolling against the reef. You find shade beneath a breadfruit tree, sipping water from a coconut husk offered by a boy no older than 8. His smile is quick, but his eyes linger on the path that leads up the slope. He whispers something. Kahili are waking, then darts off, barefoot and laughing, vanishing between the huts like a ghost with chores to finish. You follow the direction of his gaze and rise again. Your steps crunch over dry leaves and red dirt as you make your way to a small structure at the edge of the sacred precinct. It's not a temple exactly, but it breathes like one, quiet, respectful. Inside, you find them, the feather workers. But today, they're not working. Today is for honoring the past. They sit in silence around a long bundle wrapped in kappa cloth. No words, no chant, just presence. The object in the center is a kahili, not just a ceremonial staff, but an embodiment of lineage itself. These staffs stood beside Ali'i while they ruled, while they ate, while they died. They were the ultimate entourage. Decorative, yes, but also declarative. A kahili told you more than words ever could. You step closer and study its shape. Tall, taller than any man. The shaft is polished wood, dark and gleaming, worn smooth by generations of hands. The top bristles with feathers, arranged in a wide plume that almost resembles a halo. Reds, yellows, blacks, and whites, all fanning out in a gentle arc. They sway slightly with every breath of wind, as though they know they're being watched. One elder speaks softly, eyes still closed. These carry voices. You look again at the kahili. Suddenly, it feels like standing in front of a microphone, turned to history. Not for sound, but for spirit. The whispers of long-gone chiefs, their victories, their heartbreak, their decrees, all preserved in this tufted column of feathers. What's astonishing is how much reverence these objects command. They're not touched casually. You'd never lean one against a wall or use it as a walking stick. When carried, they are held upright, always upright, and moved with a kind of slow ceremony that gives them life. At state functions, kahili were borne by attendants who flanked ali'i like feathered shadows. They were rhythmically waved, not fanned like for cooling, but as a kind of punctuation mark to royal presence. Some were moved slowly, others in precise cadence to chants, visual poetry dancing through the air. You imagine a court filled with chiefs, priests, and attendants, each chief seated with two kahili beside him, feathers brushing the ceiling beams. It must have looked like a garden of birds, frozen mid-flight. Historians still debate the deeper meaning behind the waving of the kahili. Some say it represented the constant flow of mana, never still, always in motion. Others argue it symbolized vigilance, the feathers warding off evil or envy. And then there's the simple, unprovable idea that the ancestors liked the feel of wind. Here's a delightful oddity. Some high-ranking funerals included dozens of kahili, waving continuously throughout the night. Attendants would trade off in shifts, never letting the movement stop, as if to say, even in death, the chief remains in motion. The sound of all those feathers swaying, that's not something you'd forget. And these weren't disposable either. Kahili were repaired, repainted, regilded. If a chief passed, his kahili might be passed on, renamed, even refeathered. They were as immortal as a name carved in stone. But here, they danced instead of stood still. You reach out, just once, to hover your hand near the feathers. The air feels different, warmer, denser, as though time itself thickens around it. The elder beside you opens one eye, not unkindly, and murmurs. It listens. You withdraw your hand quickly. Just outside, a group of young boys march by in single file, each balancing a stick on their shoulder. Practice. Someday, one of them may carry a real kahili. It's not a small job. Those attendants had to memorize chants, walk in perfect time, maintain poise under pressure. Imagine standing beside your chief during negotiations, wars, weddings, and funerals. You are part of the body of power. You watch them disappear behind the hut, a feathered future trailing in their wake. Later that afternoon, a ritual begins. A kahili is unwrapped and slowly walked through the village, followed by a procession of chanters and elders. The people line up to watch, not to cheer. No, it's quieter than that. They bow, close their eyes, place hands on hearts. It's as if the staff itself carries not just the chief's spirit, but the entire memory of the land. One woman places a plumeria bloom at its base. Another sprinkles salt water. A child kneels and touches her forehead to the ground as it passes. It's not worship, not exactly. It's reverence for the roles that bind society, the symbols that carry meaning without words, and for a culture without a written script until Western contact. These symbols were the library. Feathers were their alphabet. Capes, the sentences. And kahili, the punctuation. You lie back again, this time beneath a pandanus tree, and close your eyes. You imagine yourself as one of those feathers, not the showy ones on the outside, but the tiny, hidden plumes near the core, the ones that give structure, the ones no one sees, but the cloak couldn't exist without. A kahili bearer walks by slowly, his staff swaying left and right with each step, the breeze catching its voice. It whispers something just for you, something you'll never quite be able to translate, but will carry with you nonetheless. Maybe that's what these feathers do. They don't speak in language. They speak in presence. You exhale. The whisper follows. It's night again, but the moon is full now, casting a cool glow over the land. You're back near the sacred platform, though it looks entirely different in this pale silver light. Where torches once burned, lanterns now flicker gently, their frames made of kappa cloth and bone. They sway like jellyfish in the breeze, casting shifting light across the polished surface of a newly displayed cloak. You approach slowly, your feet quiet on the matting, your breath caught in your throat. It's the colors that strike you first. Deep gold, edged in violent crimson, the two tones swirling together in an intricate, deliberate pattern that looks like a firestorm frozen mid-roar. The arrangement is not random. Every section has intention, every line a meaning. Tonight, a priest stands near the cloak and explains its symbols, not in lecture, but in chant. He moves his hand slowly along the back of the garment, fingers barely grazing the feathers as he sings the meaning of the design. You learn that patterns weren't just decorative, They were declarations. A cape lined with yellow feathers signaled high rank. Very high. Yellow was sacred, associated with the gods, especially the sun god Cain. It was rare too. Remember, only a few species had those yellow plumes. Finding enough to line even part of a cloak could take years, even decades. Red, in contrast, symbolized war, sacrifice, genealogy, blood in both its most brutal and most reverent meanings. Together, yellow and red didn't just say royal. They said divine. They said descendant of the gods and enforcer of their will. Black feathers were used sparingly but powerfully, sometimes as borders, sometimes in hidden patterns, only visible under certain light. Some believed they represented night, mystery, or the unspoken. Historians still debate how standardized these meanings were. Did everyone agree that yellow meant divinity? Or did that vary from island to island, chief to chief? Was a certain pattern always a mark of conquest? Or could it mean something more personal, like a family's rise from outcast to Ali? The truth is, there's no universal legend, only threads. And tonight, you're pulling on one of them. You kneel quietly near the cloak, your eyes tracing a zigzag pattern along the edge. The priest continues chanting softly, and you realize he's naming victories. Each sharp angle represents a campaign. This one against a rebellious cousin that wants to unite two valleys long at odds. Another section spirals inward, tighter and tighter, ending in a cluster of pure yellow. That's the marriage pattern. Someone whispers beside you. Two lines twined. Old blood meets new. And you start to see how these garments weren't just powerful. They were records, visual genealogies, maps of history worn on the body. If you could read the symbols, you'd know a chief's entire backstory, alliances, enemies, even personal tragedies. There's a fringe of green feathers at the base. Unexpected. Your eye lingers there, and the priest glances at you, amused. Ah, the bird of the forest, he says, added by the last feather worker, his clan's emblem. Permission was given, mana shared. So, even the artisans left their signatures, hidden in plain sight. A girl no older than 10 approaches the cloak and bows. She reaches into her pouch and draws out a single yellow feather, soft, perfect, probably from the rare OO bird, and places it gently beside the hem. A quiet offering. Feathers aren't just harvested. They're given. As the night deepens, the wind picks up. The cloak flutters slightly, the feathers rippling in an almost imperceptible wave. It's as if the garment is breathing. You sit cross-legged, letting the breeze wrap around you. And you begin to realize something profound. The cloak isn't just about the wearer. It's about everyone who contributed. Every feather is a voice. Every stitch, a memory. Every color, a choice. To wear it is to carry hundreds of lives, all trusting you to speak for them. That kind of responsibility, that's not light. And yet, when worn correctly, when worn with purpose, it looks light, effortless. That's the magic. The cloak becomes part of you. Or maybe You become part of it. You remember a legend you heard, whispered earlier in the village. A young chief once inherited a cloak, far too big for him. He wore it anyway, his shoulders barely filling the frame, the hem dragging in the dust. People laughed, said he wasn't ready, but he never removed it. "The cloak will grow into me," he said. And it did. He became the man the feathers expected. That story sticks with you. You think about the capes in other cultures, royal mantles in France, coronation robes in England, embroidered cloaks in Incan ceremonies. Power always seems to want to wear something. But Hawaiian feather cloaks, they're different. They're alive. It's not about luxury. It's about life itself. Arranged, preserved, honored. You stretch your legs, stand slowly, and walk past the cloak now. One last look over your shoulder. The feathers catch the light just so, and for a split second, you swear you see motion. A bird, a breath, a glint of recognition. The cloak remembers you too. You return to your mat near the edge of the circle, curl up, and close your eyes. The wind rustles again. Not just the trees, but the feathers. They whisper to each other in a language made of rustling, history, and hush. You don't need to translate, you feel it. When you wake the next morning, the village is already buzzing, not in the hurried, frenzied sense of preparation, but in that soft hum of a day with purpose. Someone is sweeping the paths. A group of children gather taro. A dog yawns, stretches, and wanders into the shade. You wander down the slope toward the beach, your sandals scuffing the packed earth. Something draws you there. Maybe the salt air, or maybe the quiet drumming in the distance. Not war drums, not celebration, just practice. Rhythm for the sake of rhythm. And that's when you see them, the Lawaya Manu, bird catchers, returning from the forest. Their baskets aren't overflowing. In fact, they look nearly empty. But the way people greet them, you'd think they were carrying gold. They kind of are. Inside, wrapped in kapa cloth and cushioned with soft leaves, are a few precious feathers. Bright yellow, some red, maybe even a gleam of black. Not plucked by force, but gathered with care. You remember what you learned earlier. The birds weren't killed. At least, not most of them. The catchers used sap, nets, and traps, designed to stun, not harm. Once the feathers were taken, just a few, the birds were released. There's debate about that today, of course. Historians still argue whether the practice was really as gentle as oral tradition claims. Did all bird catchers release their quarry? Or did some kill more than they admitted? There's no clear answer. The evidence is murky. But the intention? That seems pure. Respect the bird. Take only what you need. Let it live. It's sustainable before the word existed. You get a closer look as one of the catchers lifts his bundle toward the sun. The feathers shimmer. Not metallic, not gaudy, just naturally brilliant, like sunlight made solid. You ask about the process, how long it takes to gather enough for a cloak. He laughs, shaking his head. One cloak? He says, depends on the bird. If it's a OO, maybe hundreds of thousands of feathers. Years. A lifetime. Some cloaks are made by generations. And then he tells you something that makes your head tilt. No one owns the cloak. Not really. You blink. But the chief wears it. Wearing isn't owning. He says simply, the mana belongs to everyone. We just trust him to carry it. You let that sink in. Imagine that. Power, not as possession, but stewardship. The featherworker's hut is nearby, partly shaded under a pandanus tree. You're invited in. The air smells of sap, dye, and something faintly earthy, like dried ferns. The tools are simple, bone needles, fine threads made from olona bark. The feathers are sorted by color in shallow trays, organized like a painter's palette. The chief artisan, an older woman with steady hands and a gaze like ocean stone, nods to you. She's working on a piece no bigger than your forearm, but every motion is exact. One feather, then thread. Knot, tuck. Another feather, like assembling a mosaic made of wind. You notice a design beginning to form. Not a picture, but a pattern. Geometric, almost hypnotic. You ask what it means. She smiles, not looking up. This one? It sings a chant. You pause. A chant? She points to a narrow arc of alternating red and yellow. Each line marks a verse. The angles? Breath. Where the voice turns. She presses the feathers flat with a smooth stone. If you know the chant, you can read the cloak. And if you read the cloak, she looks up now, locking eyes. You remember who we are. There's a pause, heavy and serene. You step back, bow slightly, and exit the hut. Outside, another apprentice is dyeing kappa cloth. Background layers for another garment. You help, stirring the liquid. It stains your fingers ochre. You don't mind. It feels honest. By afternoon, a kind of procession forms. Not formal, but purposeful. People bring feathers. Not many. One person has 3 red ones, wrapped in tie leaf. Another brings a single bright yellow, plucked from the ground like a gift from the gods. Each feather is recorded. Yes, recorded. A chant is sung with every offering. The names of the birds, the catchers, the location. It's all spoken aloud, then folded into memory. A verbal archive, because nothing is forgotten here. Not if it's sung. There's a story you overhear during the offerings. A famous cloak, long ago, woven with feathers from a bird that went extinct during its making. The final feather never came. The cloak was left unfinished, displayed with a gap near the center. A reminder, not all power is completed. Some is interrupted. It haunts you, that tale. Later, you sit with one of the younger feather workers, barely 16. She's shy at first, but starts talking as she threads black feathers into a collar piece. This isn't just work, she says. It's our family line. Her hands pause. My grandmother added feathers to the last ahu'ula for the chief. She stitched a single white one near the heart. Not traditional, but you raise an eyebrow. She'd lost a child. Said it helped her breathe again. The chief allowed it. So garments aren't just declarations of strength. They're containers of grief, too. Carriers of sorrow, love, even rebellion. Another story comes to you, whispered by someone sweeping nearby. A cloak made entirely of red feathers, no yellow at all. A statement. I am of blood, not gods. Worn by a rebellious Ali'i who refused divine ancestry. He ruled for only 5 years. His cloak disappeared when he died. Some say it was burned, others that it waits. So many stories. And you? You're starting to see that these aren't just objects of prestige. They're living texts, chapters written in color, paragraphs in geometry, verses in feathers. By nightfall, a fire is lit near the shore, not for cooking, for singing. A storyteller recites the lineage of cloaks, past, the golden mantle of Leloa, the one lined with human teeth. Yes, really, the half-cape stolen by a rival island chief and dyed darker to hide its origin. A gust of wind tosses your hair. You smell salt, smoke, and pandanus, and you realize the story never ends. Cloaks change hands, change shapes, change meanings, but they never vanish. They just wait. The days roll forward. Though time seems to soften here, like wet sand under your toes. There's no rush, only rhythm. And each morning, you wake to new stories woven into the lives around you. Quiet, detailed, unassuming. Today, you're drawn to the heiau, the sacred temple site overlooking the ocean. It stands quiet now, stones stacked with divine intention. No offerings today, no chants, just wind slipping through the tall grass and rustling the leaves of the hala trees. You walk slowly, barefoot. The soles of your feet press into ancient lava rock, smoothed by generations. You step where Ali'i once stepped. You pass where feathered cloaks once trailed the earth. A kahuna, priest and keeper of knowledge, waits for you by the platform. He gestures silently for you to sit. You do, and then he begins. Not a chant, but a conversation, almost casual. You've seen the feathers, he says, but have you seen the bones? You blink, unsure what he means. Feathers dazzle, he continues, but the iwi kupuna, the bones of the ancestors, that's where the power stays when the flesh goes. That's why the cloaks matter. They touch both skin and spirit. And there it is, the secret thread running beneath everything. The cloaks don't just signal power, they transmit it. Power isn't in the wearer, it flows through them. It's said that when an Ali'i wore his ahu'ula, it amplified his mana tenfold. The energy of thousands of feathers, of hundreds of hands, of chants and prayers, braided into one garment that wrapped not just the body, but the lineage. Historians still argue whether this mana was metaphorical or something more. Was it psychological? A way to command loyalty and awe? Or did Hawaiians feel it? Literally, a tingling across the skin, a weight behind the eyes? You lean toward the latter. Because when the kahuna rises and briefly drapes a feathered shoulder piece over your arms, just for a moment, you feel it too. It's not warmth, exactly. It's not pressure, but your spine straightens. Your breathing slows. It's like being surrounded by a story, so old, it doesn't need words anymore. You return it carefully. He nods. No one owns the feather, he says again. It owns itself. You thank him with a bow. He points toward the inland forest and murmurs, "Go see where the power begins." So you do. You follow a narrow trail away from the coast, winding through ferns and moss-covered stones. The air thickens. The bird song rises. Soon, you're in the uplands, Wauakwa, the realm of the gods. This is where the rare birds live. The oo, with its black velvet feathers and flashes of gold. The mamo, with its deep yellow plumes. The iiwi, red as sunrise, darting among the lehua blossoms. You see them, not many, just enough. A bird catcher nearby signals for you to crouch. He points to a branch where an oo sits, preening. The catcher doesn't rush. He waits. He speaks softly to the bird. Not words, just sound. A tone of apology and thanks. He smears sap on a branch. Not enough to trap, just a slow. Then he leaves a tie leaf offering. The bird flutters down, lands, is caught. Feathers are taken, 3, maybe 4, then released. It's delicate, it's slow, it's imperfect. Sometimes birds don't survive the stress. Sometimes the catchers grieve. Still, they do it. Not for themselves, for the cloak, for the chief, for the gods. You walk back with the catcher. His basket holds less than a fistful of feathers. He looks satisfied. You know what the hardest color to get is? He asks, suddenly. You guess yellow. Or maybe white. Red, he says, surprising you. Not because it's rare, because it fades. Yellow holds, black endures. But red runs. Sunlight pulls it apart. You have to refresh it over time. With care, you mold that over. The brightest things demand the most tending. The same is true of power and of memory. Back in the village, a different kind of work begins. The women are preparing a special garment, an ahu'ula kapu, a restricted cloak meant only for high ceremony, not for battles, not for daily ruling. This one? It's for one thing only, a final rite, death. When a chief dies, he is wrapped in feathers, his body anointed, his mana sealed in silence. The cloak becomes his veil to the next world. But here's the twist. After death, the cloak doesn't stay buried. It's hidden. Hidden in a cave, in a crevice. Sometimes deep in the lava tubes beneath the island. Sometimes in cliffs that only the most trusted know. Why? So no one can misuse it. Mana remains even after death. A stolen cloak might curse an entire family or empower a traitor. So cloak guardians hide them for generations. There are rumors, of course there are, of lost capes, hidden caves, forbidden access. Some say one of Kamehameha's personal capes was never found. Others whisper that a certain valley in Kauai holds 6 cloaks buried in layers, each older than the last. Archaeologists today still debate the ethics of finding them. Museums want to display them. Descendants want to preserve them. The conversation is not easy. Historians still argue. Your guide says whether these cloaks belong to the world or only to Hawaii. You get why it's complicated. These cloaks aren't just fashion. Their identity, their sovereignty. They're alive in a way most garments never are. You help lay out a partially restored cape for airing. It's red and yellow, triangles nested within triangles. You trace the edge gently with your fingertip. You can feel it. The breath of 1,000 birds. The stitch of 1,000 hands. The presence of chiefs, long gone, but somehow still here. That night, a hula is danced not for tourists, not for display, but for the ancestors. Slow, grounded, mesmerizing. Each movement an invocation. Each gesture a memory. You sit in the back, silent, listening as the dancer moves, her shoulders draped with a replica cloak. You realize something. Feathers float, but their meaning? It weighs something deep, and somehow that weight comforts you. By now, you've stopped thinking of the ahu'ula as just a garment. It's more like a story, stitched and sung into being. And like any good story, it keeps revealing new layers. You wake before dawn and make your way to the shoreline. Today, there's a ceremony. Not a grand one, not a coronation or funeral, but something quieter. A boy is becoming a man. His family is ali'i, but from a junior line. And today, he receives his first feathered ornament. A lehulu? A feathered necklace, marking his coming status. You're invited to witness, not because you're family, but because you've been here long enough now to be trusted. You've woven kapa. You've walked the bird trails. You've watched the guardians murmur their chants over locked storage boxes. You're beginning to understand that here, every feather counts. The boy stands tall, nervous but proud. His grandmother places the lei hulu over his shoulders. It's small, just a half-moon crescent of red and yellow feathers, fastened by braided cord. But the symbolism is enormous. The first formal acknowledgement of his lineage. The first time his shoulders feel that particular weight. The older men chant softly, voices blending like waves against the reef. And in that moment, you see the boy stop fidgeting. His posture straightens. His gaze shifts, not to the crowd, but to the horizon, as if looking at the future already forming beneath his feet. Later, you walk back to the house where you've been staying. The matriarch there, a kupuna, with silver-threaded hair and calloused hands, invites you in for tea. She pours slowly, deliberately. You've seen the feathers, she says, but have you felt what they protect? You raise an eyebrow, because the feathers, they're not armor in the usual way. Not like spears or stones or steel, but they carry prayers, layers of them, folded in. She tells you the story of a warrior chief who wore a short cloak, kahei, made of iiwi feathers. In battle, it caught a spear meant for his chest. The point pierced through, but the cloak slowed it just enough to save him. Historians don't agree on that, she says with a chuckle. Some say it was just luck. Some say it was the way the spear hit. But I say it was the prayers. And prayers, she adds, were never just whispered words. They were pounded into kapa, chanted into fibers, placed into each stitch as the women assembled the cloak. That's something the museums never mention. How women held the power to transmit prayer through labor. It wasn't showy, it wasn't public, but it was essential. There's a growing debate among modern scholars now. Whose mana is really embedded in the cloaks? Is it only the chiefs? Or is it communal? The result of so many women, so many birds, so many hands, and hopes. You let that swirl in your mind like steam from your tea. The next day, you visit a featherworker's Hale, one of the last traditional artisans in this region. Her fingers move so quickly, so gently. She shows you her materials. Split, Olona fiber cordage, plant dyes, bundles of red apapane, and yellow mamo feathers. She teaches you to twist thread from bark. It's harder than it looks. She laughs at your first crooked line, but not unkindly. I used to cry when I first started, she confesses, because it takes hours just to get 1 foot of cord right. But my grandmother told me, each foot is 1 more foot of connection. And so you keep trying. As the sun lowers, she shows you a nearly completed feather cloak, replica. It's not a perfect reproduction. Some birds are gone now, extinct. She uses dyed goose feathers for certain sections, but the pattern, authentic, bold chevrons. The red so deep, it almost glows in the fading light. She tells you this replica will be worn in a cultural reenactment. Part pageantry, part education. Not sacred, but important. And then she lets you hold it. It's heavier than you expect. Not by weight, but by presence. Like holding time. Like holding memory. Like holding something that remembers more than you ever could. She looks at you quietly and says, "You feel it, yeah?" You nod. Now imagine you're the one who has to wear it. Not just on your shoulders, in your decisions, in your voice. That's what it meant to be Aliye. You help her carefully fold the cloak. She places it in a lauhala box. Layers of kapa cloth between each fold. No air, no light. Only stillness. She says goodnight, and you walk back under a sky drenched in stars. That night, you dream not of cloaks, but of feathers floating. Dozens of them, no hundreds, spiraling upward. They form a swirling pattern, and at the center, a figure. Not one chief, not one woman, but a composite of all of them, layered over each other, like the cloak itself. You wake up certain of one thing. No single person owns the feather story. It's a collective song. Later that morning, you meet with a modern curator at a small regional museum. She shows you digital renderings of cloaks scanned in 3D. They're preserving shape, color, even wear patterns. A preservation project, not just for Hawaii, but for the world. Still, she says, there's tension. Some people want the cloaks returned from overseas collections. Others worry about handling sacred objects too casually. And still others say, let the cloaks rest. Let them be stories now, not exhibits. Historians still argue whether access equals respect. She tells you, we walk that line every day. Before you leave, she hands you a replica feather pendant. Just a small one. A thank you. You wear it tucked inside your shirt. Not for display, just for remembrance. And as you step outside, warm sun overhead, sea breeze brushing your face, you realize something. The feathered cloaks weren't just worn. They were born, like weight, like memory, like responsibility. And you've started to carry a sliver of that now too. You wake the next morning to the rhythmic sound of kapa being pounded in the distance. Thud, pause, thud, thud, steady like a heartbeat. It's oddly comforting now, like waves or wind through palm leaves. It tells you that people are still remembering, still weaving, still listening to the past speak in soft percussion. You've been invited to a gathering today, a kind of living symposium, though no one calls it that. It's part performance, part cultural demonstration, and part quiet reclamation. Elders, artisans, dancers, and young learners all under one long open pavilion, shaded by woven mats and palm fronds. A young man approaches you, dressed in a red malo and lei kukui, his face marked with natural charcoal. We're starting, he says softly, and gestures for you to sit. The first group to step forward is a hula halau. Their chant begins low, a deep vibration that fills your chest before it reaches your ears. The dancers move slowly, deliberately, not the fast, tourist-style hula you might see in glossy brochures. This is hula kahiko, the old form. Feet grounded, hands telling, eyes unwavering. And then you see it. One of the dancers wears a shoulder drape made of layered red and yellow feathers. It's not quite a full cape, more of a mantle, but it sways with its movement like flame in slow motion. The light catches each quill, and for a moment, you forget where you are. The feathers seem to shimmer like molten gold. The chant speaks of Ku, the god of war and governance. The dancer embodies him, not just with posture, but with that cloak. The object becomes the spirit. The spirit becomes the dance. You feel it in your spine. Afterward, a quiet applause. No one claps loudly. It doesn't feel right, somehow. You wander to a table where feather artisans are explaining their work. You recognize one of them, Kalahua, the woman who let you help her twist cordage days ago. She beams when she sees you. This, she says, holding up a small panel of feathers arranged in a chevron, is for the next ahu'ula, we're restoring. A partial one from Maui. Only fragments survived, so we're filling in with contemporary feathers, but using the old style. You ask if that's controversial. Using modern materials. Oh, you'd better believe it, she says with a wink. Some say it's not authentic. Others say it's better than leaving the old cloaks to dust. Me? I think of it like a chant. Sometimes you forget a verse, so you sing a new one to remember the shape of the old. You linger as she demonstrates how to place each feather into the netted backing. A small dab of sap, a press, a prayer. It's precise and rhythmic, like surgery, but also like poetry. There's a child nearby, maybe 8 years old, watching intently. She asks, "Can I try?" Kalehua hands her a practice swatch. The child fumbles, nearly bends a feather, but is guided gently. No scolding, just quiet correction. And then the child places her first feather, crooked but secure. That, Kalehua whispers, is how the next generation begins. As the afternoon wears on, you sit in on a storytelling circle led by a kupuna. She recounts the tale of a chief who once had his feather cloak stolen, not in battle, but by betrayal. A jealous rival took it and tried to wear it at court. But, she says with a sly grin, when he put it on, the people turned away. They knew the cloak didn't fit him, not on the body, but on the soul. The moral: you can wear the feathers, but that doesn't make you ali'i. You think about that all evening. It sticks in your mind the way a single song lyric does. When you're not trying to remember it, you can't fake mana. You can't inherit integrity. It has to be lived. That night, back at your borrowed lodging, you look at your own clothes. A cotton shirt, frayed jeans, the replica feather pendant tucked at your chest. Nothing sacred, nothing royal, but something about this journey has changed the way you view garments, status, and even silence. You dream again, this time, not of feathers, but of hands. Dozens of hands working together, passing feathers, tying cords, chanting low. A tapestry of motion. And in the morning, you realize you've become part of that collective, if only briefly. A visitor, yes, but also a witness. And in Hawaiian tradition, to witness is never passive. You walk to the heiau, the sacred temple site, alone this time. The stones are still, the air almost reverent. You remove your shoes, out of instinct, not because anyone told you to, but because it feels necessary. There's a stone platform where offerings were once left, not feather cloaks, that would be unthinkable, but bundles of tie leaves, leis, kapa, carved ki'i. You place your hands on the warm stone. It doesn't speak, not in words, but it holds something, like memory, like breath. Later, you speak with a language teacher. He tells you about the word hulu, which means both feather and treasured. The same word. So, when we say ali'i hulu makua, he explains, we mean noble chiefs, but literally feathered ancestors, treasured ones. That dual meaning, material and metaphor, is baked into the language, and by extension, into the cloak. To wear hulu is to wear lineage. There's a quote he shares from an elder. Hulu wale no ke ali'i. A chief is only a chief because of the feathers, because of what those feathers represent. Power, yes, but also duty, sacrifice, ancestry. You jot it down in your notebook, but you don't really need to. It's already tucked into your mind like a tucked feather. You spend your final day visiting a local high school where students are learning about traditional arts. One class is creating digital designs of historic cloaks, using VR to simulate texture and movement. Another class is composing oli, chants, to honor specific chiefs and landscapes. You ask a student how they feel wearing a replica feather cape. It's heavy, he says, smiling. But not the weight. It's the feeling that everyone's watching, even the ancestors. He pauses, like, you can't just stand there. You gotta stand right. And just like that, you understand the heart of the ahu'ula. It's not about royalty for royalty's sake. It's about responsibility made visible. It's a mirror reflecting who you are and who you're expected to be. And now that you've seen that mirror, you carry a feather of your own, if only in spirit. You leave the school with the students' words still echoing in your head. You gotta stand right. It's not a phrase you'll find in history books, but it might be the truest summary of Hawaiian ali'i you've heard yet. That night, you're invited to a twilight ceremony on the bluff overlooking the ocean, a place where the wind cuts clean and the sea below churns with quiet power. It's not a reenactment, no pageantry, no pretend coronations, just a gathering, a remembrance. The sky goes purple as the sun lowers itself into the sea. People begin arriving in small clusters. Some carry conch shells. Others bring drums or bundles of tit leaves. There are no signs, no formal announcements, but somehow everyone knows what to do. You're handed a small lei made of white kukui blossoms and red cord. The scent is delicate, like fresh sap and faint citrus. The person who gives it to you simply nods. No instructions. You loop it around your neck and take your place near the edge of the cliff. Then it begins. A single note on the pew, deep and long, like the breath of the island itself. Then another, and another. 3 blasts. Traditional call to attention. A group of elders, dressed in deep yellow kapa and black feathered capes, walk slowly to the center of the circle. One of them carries a feathered standard, a kahili, that dances ever so slightly in the wind. It's not tall or dramatic, like the ones from old paintings, but its meaning is unmistakable. They begin to chant, not for tourists, not for cameras, but for the Aina, for the land and the ali'i who once stood exactly here. The words are old, but your ears are growing sharper now. You pick up phrases, Hi inoa no Liloa, a name chant for Liloa, the famed 15th century chief of Hawaii Island, whose royal lineage would shape centuries of leadership. Ekupa aika aike kupuna. Stand firm in the knowledge of the ancestors. The chant rises and falls like surf. It is not soothing, exactly. It is strong. It insists you listen, and you do. You listen with your skin. Behind you, a breeze lifts the kukui blossoms against your neck. The air smells of ocean salt, distant tea root being burned, and something older. Not unpleasant, just ancient. And then, a small group steps forward, wearing replicas of ahu'ula, bright in the fading light. They aren't chiefs. They're artisans, students, caretakers, and performers. But in this moment, they carry the weight of those garments with complete reverence. One woman stands apart. Her cape is unique, woven in a pattern not copied from any museum, but based on oral descriptions passed down through her family. No yellow, no red, just dark green feathers with hints of white and gold, like rainforest mist captured in thread. As she steps forward, an elder explains to the gathered group, "This is not about royalty. This is about remembrance." The feather cloak was never just worn. It spoke. It reminded the alii who they were and who they served. The woman kneels. Her cape brushes the ground like a low tide pulling across lava rock. She whispers something you can't hear, then lays a folded square of kapa cloth on the earth. You want to ask what it means, but no one else moves, so neither do you. Instead, you think about how this kind of ceremony would have been impossible 50 years ago, when much of Hawaiian culture was still suppressed, when speaking Olelo Hawaii in schools was discouraged, when the cloak was trapped in glass behind museum walls, locked away like a forgotten god. Now, you're standing in a moment that feels both old and new. A reclaiming, but not with force, with presence. Someone behind you murmurs, "He ali ika aina, he kawa ke kanaka." The land is chief, and the people are its servants. It's a well-known proverb, and you've heard it before. But this time, the weight of it lands heavily, quietly, like a feather falling into water. After the chant fades and the feathered bearers step back, the group disperses. No formal ending, just fading footsteps and murmured thanks. You find yourself walking slowly to the edge of the cliff again. Below, the water churns against black stone, glowing faintly in the light of a crescent moon. You think about that green feathered cape. How it wasn't a replica of something from the past, but a continuation. A new chapter in a long story, written not in ink, but in fiber and feather. There's a saying Kalahua mentioned earlier in the week. Aohe pauka, ik-ika halau ho'okahi. Not all knowledge is learned in one school. You smile to yourself. No kidding. Later that night, You're invited to one final conversation with the restoration team. You gather around a low table under string lights, eating taro chips and drinking coconut water from glass jars. One of the younger weavers brings out a small bundle. She unwraps it carefully, revealing a swatch of netted IOE cord with 5 tiny orange feathers stitched in. It's nothing special, she says shyly. Just my first sample. I wasn't sure if I should keep it. Everyone at the table leans in. Someone laughs softly. That's where we all started. And in a way, it's true. Every massive cloak, the ones with thousands of feathers, began with something small. One knot, one feather, one intention. A tiny beginning that, multiplied by time and hands and care, becomes something transcendent. You think about your own life. What would your version of a cloak look like? What colors would it hold? What stories would it whisper? The night deepens. Someone begins to softly sing an old lullaby in Olelo. Others hum along. You don't know the words, but your body understands. There's nothing left to explain, just a hush, a held breath, the kind of silence that honors. You rest your head back, watching the stars emerge. You've spent the past days wrapped not just in stories of feathered cloaks, but in the very spirit of what they were meant to protect. And it's not something you'll leave behind, because the cloak was never just for the chief. It was always for the people. The next morning, you wake up slower than usual. Not groggy, just quiet. Like your body still carrying the cadence of chant and the scent of kukui blossoms. You stretch, then pull on your light jacket. It's cooler today. Cloudy. The kind of weather that makes everything feel a little dreamlike. You're heading somewhere unusual this time. The Bishop Museum in Honolulu. Yes, a museum. Yes, there will be glass cases. But you've learned by now not to roll your eyes too quickly, because this isn't just any museum. It's the Museum of Hawaiian History. And in one particular room, under dim, respectful lighting and carefully regulated humidity, rests one of the most storied objects of the entire Pacific. The Ahu'ula of Kamehameha Kwan, also known as the War Cloak. You wander through a few wings first. Koa wood canoes, longer than buses, carved idols with staring eyes, photographs of Ali who seem to gaze back through time. And then, finally, you arrive in the room where the cape is kept. The lights are soft. The room is hushed, and there it is, mounted upright, tall, and almost regal in its simplicity. The cloak stands nearly 5 feet long, covered in over 450,000 golden o'o feathers. Feathers now so rare, the bird itself has been extinct for decades. You step closer. The golden hue is deeper than you expected. Not gaudy, almost matte, like sunlight through smoke. Historians believe this cloak took generations of labor, not just collecting feathers, a process that required catch and release to avoid harming the birds, but also weaving each strand of netting, preparing the olona fiber, dyeing secondary colors, and ensuring the symmetry was perfect. Perfect. Because This wasn't just fashion. This was strategy. You learned that Kamehameha wore the cloak, not just during ceremonies, but in battle, not as armor, but as symbolic defense. His enemies would see the bright yellow cloak flashing across the battlefield and hesitate. Who would dare strike a man cloaked in the divine? There's a famous moment in Hawaiian history, the Battle of Nuuanu in 1795. Kamehameha's forces pushed Oahu's defenders up the Pali cliffs. According to some stories, he wore this very cloak as he advanced. Others argue it was a different Ahu'ula. But that's the thing. Historians still debate whether the war cloak was ceremonial or functional. Some suggest it was too precious to risk. Others believe its use in warfare was deliberate, a psychological weapon as much as a spiritual one. You stare at it for a long time. It's not just its age or craftsmanship that hits you, it's the silence around it. There are no buttons to press, no interactive screens, just reverence. Like someone has placed a sun inside a glass case and whispered, "Shh." But here's the thing you notice. As you look closer, tiny variations in the feathers begin to appear. A few are darker, some slightly frayed, a handful out of alignment. It's not perfect after all, but that makes it better. It makes it human. You imagine the weavers, barefoot, bent over their work under lamplight. The bird catchers, silent in the forest, waiting hours for one flash of yellow. The alii, standing with his arms raised as the cloak was fastened. And someone, some anonymous attendant, adjusting the shoulders just so. You're jolted gently out of your thoughts by a voice. You know what else they say? It's a museum guide. She's older, with bright eyes, and a badge that reads, Auntie Malia. You blink, then smile. What's that? Those feathers hold mana, she says, tapping the glass lightly. But not just because they're rare. It's all the hands that touch them, the time, the intention. She tilts her head. That's what gives it power. You nod. Mana by way of effort. Exactly, she says. Effort and connection. That's the stuff of chiefs. Before you leave, she hands you a postcard. It has an image of the cloak on one side and a quote on the back. A cloak is not just worn. It is born. You tuck it into your notebook. Later that afternoon, you sit under a monkey pod tree and sketch a little. Not the whole cloak. You're not that ambitious. Just the curve of the neckline, the repeating crescent pattern, the shadows in yellow. You draw slowly, respectfully. You start thinking about museums differently. You used to think of them as places where things went to die. But now you realize there are places where things are paused, protected, preserved until someone's ready to learn. Like you. And honestly, you feel a little lucky. Because not everyone gets to see these capes in person. Some are hidden away in archives. Some are thousands of miles from their home. You recall the story Kalehua told you about a group of activists who traveled to a British museum to see a cloak that hadn't been back to Hawaii in over 150 years. They didn't touch it. They just sang to it. A traditional mele. A welcoming. A reminder. We still remember you Because even a cloak in exile remembers where it came from. Even feathers behind glass still carry songs. And you, curious, sleepy you, have been lucky enough to hear them. You pack your things as the breeze picks up. The monkey pod leaves flutter like applause. Somewhere behind you, a group of school kids rushes past, laughing. You think about the way history lingers, not in textbooks or timelines, but in texture, in color, in silence. And as you head toward your next stop, you carry the image of Kamehameha's cloak with you, not as a relic, but as a whisper that says, power isn't what you wear, it's how you carry it. You're up early today, not because the sun woke you, but because something's pulling you forward. A quiet urgency in your chest, like a whisper you can almost hear. So you follow it, not to a museum this time, not even to a historical site, just to a stretch of coastline on Kauai where the wind moves freely and the ocean speaks in long, rolling exhalations. You're walking along a path near Waimea when you see it. A weathered stone platform, partially hidden by tall grass, just above the shoreline. No signs, no fences, just rock and sky. It's a heiau, an ancient Hawaiian temple. You approach carefully. The stones are worn smooth in places, rough in others. You don't step onto it. You know better. This is not your space to occupy, just one to witness. You sit a few paces away on a smooth rock, the wind combing your hair like a mother soothing a child. And slowly, softly, a story begins to unspool in your mind. A story of ritual, of power, and of something deeper. See, the feather cloaks you've learned about weren't just beautiful. They were sacred, and many of them were created not just as adornments, but as offerings, tribute, anchors for mana. When a new ali'i rose to power, his status needed to be affirmed, not just by battles won or lands held, but by the gods. And that meant ceremony, huge ones. Imagine a procession winding up this coast centuries ago. Priests in long white kapa, young attendants carrying bundles wrapped in tie leaves, drums pounding slowly in the distance. And at the center, an ali'i wearing a freshly made feather cloak, its colors gleaming in the sun like fire on water. He doesn't strut, he steps, each movement measured, rehearsed, full of reverence. At the heiau, chants rise, offerings are made, feathers, precious, luminous, are presented as gifts to the gods, and sometimes woven into new cloaks, right on sacred ground. You realize something now. The act of making a cloak wasn't just artistic, it was religious. There's this belief, still debated by scholars, that certain ahu'ula were never meant to be worn by people at all. They were crafted purely to be left at the heiau. Gifts, prayers in fiber form. Others were buried with the dead or hidden in caves, their locations known only to a few, a kind of protective sleep, which makes you wonder how many feather cloaks still lie unseen, resting somewhere deep in the forests or behind rock walls. No one knows for sure, but here's a fun fringe tidbit. There are stories, mostly whispered by old-timers, about feather capes that move, not on their own exactly, but they're said to grow warm when handled, to hum quietly in dark rooms, or to draw dreams to those who sleep nearby. Dreams of chanting, of birdsong, of thunder over the sea. You smile. It sounds a little ridiculous. And yet, you're sitting by a heiau right now, and there's definitely something electric in the air. A hush that's more than wind. You close your eyes, and just for a moment, you let yourself pretend. You see the feathers being laid out on kapa cloth. You feel the tension in the air before a sacred rite. You hear a conch shell blown across a valley, the sound curving through trees like a spine. And you see a young woman, barefoot, steady, holding a half-finished cloak in her arms, like a sleeping child. She's not famous, not a chiefess, just someone who was trusted to help. Her hands are stained with red dye. Her hair smells of smoke and sweet root. And though no one writes her name down in any chant or genealogy, she knows her place in the pattern. She is the link, the weaver, the witness. You open your eyes. The waves are louder now, closer. The tide has crept up while you were dreaming. You take that as your cue and rise slowly, brushing sand from your legs. Before leaving, you bow slightly toward the heiau, not because you're required to, but because something in you knows it's right. As you walk back, a line comes to you out of nowhere. Maybe from a book, maybe from your own thoughts. To wear the feather cloak, one must carry the weight of many wings. It stays with you for hours. That night, you're back in a small Hale-style cottage on the edge of a taro field. The frogs are singing loudly. A gecko chirps from the ceiling beam. You lie on your mat, still thinking about the girl with the red-dyed fingers. And you wonder how many unnamed people shaped the course of history. How many wove, gathered, sorted, died, chanted, blessed, protected. Without recognition, you drift off, imagining a room full of capes, each one humming softly, a low chorus of gratitude. Because history remembers the chiefs, but the feathers, they remember everyone. You wake to the soft pre-dawn gray, the sound of roosters in the distance, and a breeze that carries the scent of damp earth and hibiscus. Something about the air feels different today, lighter, like you've passed through a long tunnel of memory and now stepped back into morning light. But your journey's not over yet. There's one last stop, calling to you. Not ancient, not buried in centuries past, but alive, breathing, tucked into the present, like a sacred ember smoldering beneath layers of modernity. You're in Honolulu now, just a short ride from downtown, near the Bishop Museum. You've seen plenty of glass cases by this point, filled with ahu'ula, sealed behind panels, unmoving and silent. But what you're about to enter isn't a gallery. It's a studio. You open the door and step into a room that hums, not with chants, but with sewing machines. Still, the air holds reverence and feathers. They're everywhere. Bundles of them, sorted by hue and sheen, laid out like a rainbow exploded across kapa-covered tables. Ready iwi, yellow o'o, green amakihi. Only, of course, these aren't taken from wild birds anymore. Most are sustainably gathered, dyed goose or rooster feathers. Ethically sourced, carefully chosen. You're greeted by a group of artists. Quiet, focused, mostly local, many native Hawaiian. They call themselves Huihulu, a featherworking collective. Revivalists, healers of memory. They nod to you, offer a seat, and then return to their work. Fingers dancing with ancient precision. No pomp, no performance, just craft. On one table, someone's restoring a royal kahili, the feathered staff once carried beside kings. On another, a woman is halfway through a modern feather cape, commissioned for a cultural festival. She explains softly, "This one's not meant to be worn by a chief. It's for the keiki, the kids. We want them to feel the weight of it, even if just for a few seconds." You watch her tie each feather in, using a pattern passed down from ancestors. Double knots, exact spacing, rhythmic hand motions like a hula for the fingers. There's a kind of trance in it. The repetition, the respect. At one point, she turns to you and grins. People always ask how long it takes. Truth is, we don't count in hours. We count in generations. You nod, half laughing, because that sounds so poetic and true. And also because you're now holding a modern cloak yourself. It's lighter than you expect, silky, soft, but also oddly dense with presence. It smells faintly of lauhala and smoked wood. Not old, but rooted. You run your hand along the feathers, and for a moment, you almost expect to feel them twitch. And here's the thing. Historians still debate whether these modern reproductions can carry mana, whether revival is merely symbolic or truly spiritual. But you don't feel like debating. You feel like listening, because the cloak hums in your hands, a low vibration, or maybe just your own heartbeat. You learn that some revivalists have taken featherwork even further, incorporating it into fashion, tattoo, even 3D printed ceremonial pieces. One artist uses laser cutting to replicate ancient feather patterns on acrylic panels, casting shadows that shift like birds in flight. Is it traditional? Purists argue both sides, but the elders say, as long as the intent is pure, the feathers will find their way. And perhaps, most powerful of all, you hear how schools across the islands are now teaching keiki how to make miniature kahili. Not toys, not crafts, but sacred symbols, scaled to tiny hands. A new generation learning the old shapes. You picture a child holding up a finished feather stick, wobbling a little under its weight, but beaming, and that makes you realize featherwork was never static. Even in ancient times, styles evolved. Some cloaks were long, others short, some all red, some a patterned mosaic of yellow, black, and green. Some made for war, some for peace, some perhaps just for rain dances on a lucky Tuesday. There was never one correct way, only the right spirit behind the making, the right intention, the right song. You glance around the studio again. No one here is rushing. No one checks their phone. There are no instructions printed out on glossy pamphlets. Only hands, memory, silence. And in that silence, you begin to hear the rustle of wings. The old stories aren't gone. They're molting, becoming new. You think back to the first cloak you imagined, draped on the shoulders of a great ali'i, shimmering in the torchlight. Now, you understand what gave it power wasn't just feathers or dyes. It was people, hundreds of them, living and long gone. Every cloak is a tapestry of breaths, every knot a heartbeat, and every single feather a prayer. The studio light is warm now. Afternoon slants through slatted windows, painting gold stripes across the floor. One of the artists nods to you, sensing it's time for you to go. You place the cloak down gently, and before you leave, you turn back for one last look, not at the feathers, but at the people, because this history never truly belonged to royalty alone. It always belonged to the hands. You step outside into the soft kiss of early evening, the scent of plumeria on the air. A gentle trade wind stirs your hair, and for a moment you stand still, letting the last light of the day settle over your shoulders, like a cloak. You don't have one draped across your back, of course. No red and yellow feathers, no regal lineage or warriors bowing at your feet. But you carry something now, a knowing, a softness stitched with centuries. You wander downhill toward the water, the streetlights not yet lit, your footsteps quiet. And as you walk, you think not about royalty, but about legacy. Because somewhere between the royal feather capes of Kamehameha and the hands of a child tying a miniature kahili lies the true thread of this story. Not power, not prestige, but presence. These capes weren't just tools of command. They were relationships between the ali'i and the birds, between the kahuna and the craftsmen, between the weavers and the families who fed them while they worked for months, sometimes years, on a single cape. They were a declaration of interdependence, of care, of faith. You remember how the birds were caught, gently, painstakingly, sometimes with tree sap traps that didn't harm them. The gatherers would pluck just a few feathers and let the birds fly free again. An act of patience in a world that didn't even have clocks. You remember how some of the rarest cloaks were made from thousands of feathers, gathered from tens of thousands of birds. And yet, somehow, the birds endured, year after year, because people waited. Historians still argue whether that kind of ecological restraint was intentional or instinctual, whether it was sustainable out of necessity or belief. But does it matter? Maybe the deeper truth is that the cloak didn't just belong to the chief, it belonged to the forest. And now, standing here, beside the lapping ocean waves, you feel the tug of something older than memory. You imagine slipping into an ahu'ula, not to rule, not to perform, but just to be seen, to feel, for once, the weight of your ancestors on your back, not in judgment, but in warmth. And then you remember what the Kumuhulu said, that feathers will find their way. So, you look up and you see one, just a single bird, darting across the sky, silhouetted against the twilight. Maybe a myna, maybe a dove, definitely not a royal bird, but beautiful all the same. It flits across the wind like a brushstroke, and suddenly, you're reminded that all this, the cloaks, the capes, the kahili, the crowns, it's not just past, it's happening now, in classrooms, in craft circles, in quiet homes, where a tutu teaches her granddaughter to tie a feather. Maybe that's the real secret of Hawaiian feather work. It was never just for chiefs. It was always for the future. Now slow down for me. Let your breath deepen. Your chest rise gently with the warm hush of air around you. You're safe now. No more chiefs. No more birds. No more centuries. Just the soft rustle of wind through imaginary feathers and the lull of waves just beyond your window. Let the color of those cloaks fade from your eyes, the crimson and gold melting into warm grays and dusky purples. You're floating now, not in a canoe, but in calm, in weightless stillness. The stories have folded themselves around you like kapa, soft, worn, and comforting. You've walked with kings and craftsmen, with gatherers and weavers, and now it's time to lay it all down. Rest easy. You've earned your own cloak of dreams. Sleep gently beneath its endless, quiet wings.